Thank you for the introduction, for the invitation, and for the very warm welcome. I'm delighted to be here and to share this journey with you, this voyage into the future. So I was thinking, what does that represent? What would be a good metaphor for the voyage into the future? And what came to me was like traveling to Mars. So let's take that as an example, a picture of where we're going. But first, a question for all of you. I'm wondering how many of you here are already working on a project of digitalization, or you have a big challenge. Please raise your hands nice and high. Either something that you're concretely thinking, how am I going to achieve that, or already something that you're deep in the middle of. Okay, so for you, and I think that's probably most of you if you didn't manage to get your hand up, that's also your Mars. So let's think about that journey where you're going to achieve that project of digitalization. And how we're going to break that down, because as mentioned, I think that one of the challenges is to connect the innovation and research with delivering concretely your objectives and your goals. And so if we were going to go to Mars, one way we could do it would be to launch our voyage, our spaceship, and then wait for years, for generations, hoping that it's going to arrive. But that's our first test. It's our first journey. And we have all those years. We might not even see the arrival and achievement of those goals, which is kind of worrying. Maybe something happens along the way and we never get there. So what we need to focus on is how do we break that down into smaller pieces that will convince us from the time that we launch that we're going where we need to be. What would be smaller, concrete, achievable things? A journey that we could do to the moon, for example, would be something that is achievable on a shorter time scale and would convince us that we're going to make it there. Maybe there's something even closer to home. Maybe we're just going to fly an airplane and simulate high levels of gravity. But taking these concrete steps in a way that will convince us we're going to achieve where we want to go. So to motivate this voyage, this journey, I'll give a little background about my personal journey and how this connects with digitalization. As mentioned, I came to Switzerland originally to work at CERN as a physicist. This is a picture of me when I was underground preparing our experiment in the cavern there. This is the Atlas experiment. And what this picture represents for me is a big part of the work of big data, which is not as glorious as announcing results like the discovery of the Higgs boson at a press conference. It's not even as smooth as programming at your computer. Here it's basically plumbing. We were down there checking the cooling system. There's some sort of a leak because you have to get your hands dirty to extract the data. It doesn't just, sometimes some data comes in, but then it's not perfectly clean. You have to think about how am I going to get that into a form where I can extract what I want from this data. So one of my messages is that just don't be afraid to get your hands dirty. That is part of digitalization. Sometimes we do get to use computers. This is the control room where all this data comes streaming in, where we look for the patterns and interpret the results, make sure everything is running smoothly. And I use this as a chance to talk about, well, what is big data? Some of you might have heard a definition around the 4 V's, volume, velocity, variety, veracity, that you should have a lot of data, a large volume. It should be coming in very quickly, many different kinds that you want to connect up, and you should be able to trust this data. These are important points. But for me, it's something a little bit different than that. It's also about the fact that basically the data is all around us. Similar to this question of the sensors installed in this building, it's a way of thinking about the world that everything that we're doing and every way that we're interacting, we can digitize these things, then we can put digital processes behind them, and we can answer questions by connecting that up. So it's a new way of thinking about the data that's actually around us all the time. It fits well for physicists with the physical world connecting to the digital world. And increasingly, as companies, as humans, we're interested in this data. We're very hungry for this data. I put the picture of the cookie here. It starts with the internet and the tracking on e-commerce. But in Japan, I had the opportunity to work, for example, with physical retailers who started to have the same hunger for data. They're looking over at e-commerce and they're saying, wow, how do they know all these things about their customers? How long they're staying in the stores? What is attracting them, what they're doing? And we can do the same things by tracking with different kinds of sensors. This is Internet of Things. The picture here looks maybe a little creepy. They're not being hit by this beam. This is just a way of counting who's passing by. And this is part of the challenge. You can register that data, in this case, collecting from Wi-Fi signals from smartphones. When people are carrying the technology with us, it allows us to connect the physical and the digital. But then you also have to ground it in reality. So how many people were passing through this space, and what does this actually mean for our results? Since coming back in Switzerland, I'm working at Apprenez-en Switzerland, as mentioned. This is quite traditional business. It's not what you think of in terms of technology. It's not the same as those physical retailers trying to move their product. But there are a lot of the same questions that we face because the world has transformed to be so digital. We're present now on all of the digital channels, on the social media, and the volume of data that's coming in is increasingly important. And so even for such a traditional type of communication where we're looking at the image of Switzerland abroad, we need to ask these questions about how to manage that complexity of data that's flowing in. Similarly, at Bernier Associés, this is, we don't have exactly the same word in English, the fiduciary. So an accounting, audit, advisory firm, tax. This is our fiscal guide, so very traditional sort of business, but all of these lines of business are transforming, accelerating their transformation at an astonishing pace. And we need to ask ourselves these basic questions, how to keep up and then be ahead of these transformations. What kind of data can we incorporate, whether that's data that we're already holding or maybe data that we have to go ahead and collect, something that we have to be a bit more creative about. So why do these traditional types of businesses come and ask so many questions about data? Why are they thinking about digitalization? Well, they're looking at the tech companies. They're looking at Silicon Valley and they're saying, what's happening there and how is it different? And a big part of that is what we call network effects. It's that when we move to this digital world and we're connected up, we get a benefit from other people who are doing the same things. If you think of on a social network, all the value, all the content, that's coming from us. We're exchanging on that platform. And so network effects is a power in a business when we connect into that, where each additional person who joins is creating more value for the others. And when you think about this, it helps in choosing which types of projects you might want to launch or how you want to align them. Think about what will be the benefit for the initial users, but how is that going to grow? How is that going to scale? So that you have something that's going to be sustainable, that's going to support itself as it goes along, and that users will continue to come in and grow that platform with you. So this is a bit the motivation for the journey. Now I want to go a little bit more into the specifics. I wrote it as digitalization because it's two concepts that I want to pull apart a little bit between digitization and digitalization. So digitization in French would be like numérisation. This is about moving from the physical to digital information, machine-readable, computerized information. And there's lots of challenges and opportunities that go along just with this step. A lot of you may have started to do the scanning of documents, right? We have some that come in already in a digital format, but we have some that are physical, and we need to get rid of those file cabinets, reduce the amount of paper and materials that we have floating around. And this has some concerns associated because you want to automate that process. You want to just dump your file cabinet in there and perfectly organized files come out. Information comes out from that. But we have some concerns around the accuracy. The metaphor I like to use for this is it's like I had a problem with my dishwasher where it wasn't cleaning or drying all the dishes. It's a type of automation, right? It's a tool that you want to use for a human task. You put things in, they come out clean. But if you have to check everything that comes out and half of them are not in the condition that you want, you wind up using more time on that stage of checking things that come out than you're benefiting from the automation. In the end, you might revert to doing things in a manual way. So these are the kind of questions we have to ask ourselves when we move to an automated process. What level of accuracy and performance do we need, and how does it fit together between the digital process and the human process so that we're going to achieve the results that we hope with that? We also need to think about, when we're bringing a whole organization forward on this kind of process, what's the quick win, the value that they're going to get from it. Because in our Mars vision of this, maybe everything is 100% digital and it's all connected and we only feel we could get there in 10 years. But it's very hard to keep people going along on that path when they see the first results and maybe it's not 100%. So concretely, we could take a smaller piece. We have to think about, okay, what would be a local journey we can take that gets us there, and how do we extract the information, the value from that, besides just saying, okay, we have the digital files, they're stored here. And so that's where we move more into the digitalization part. This is about the processes behind, the way that we connect up and extract information from that data, and how we transform the human processes to fit together with it. For example, search. Being able, once you have that data in a digital format, to get it back out, the piece that you want. At some time in the past, this could be that you have a very organized structure and you want to drill down through the tree of all of your files, but now the intelligence is coming in where we should be able to communicate in a more natural way with our information and extract insights instead of just manually digging out small bits of it. What does that look like? Well, it is a stepwise process. It's something that we have to go through as a transformation. First, at the level of digitization, when we collect this information, there is a step of human involvement where we look at the quality of what's coming out and the insights that we gain from that. In the case of media analysis, we have humans who are reading the information that's coming in from a variety of journals. But from that, we can then move to a form of automation, a form of systematic platform for this, where we look at the rules, the patterns in the way that people are interpreting this information. And this lays the grounds for further evolution as we move towards artificial intelligence and machine learning, that we have to codify what are the things that the humans are doing and teach these to computers. This is the process of machine learning. First, we have to start with this data. As I mentioned, there is a great variety of it. In the case of media, the kinds of complexities that we have, well, we're looking at media coming in from all over the world, from all different sources. It's coming in different languages. It's coming in on different platforms. And this is where we have to rely on that kind of support from the algorithms, because the number of people that we need to treat it, it just doesn't lead to the kind of reactivity that we need when new things are coming in. So we have all these flows, we're collecting it up, but then we have to interpret the meaning and the patterns within this data as it flows. One way to do this is to extract from large bodies of text the keywords. Try to find categories, try to find the patterns that are within. This is a small demo that you can try just free on the internet, and you can see here for some news that's coming out of blueFACTORY. It works at a certain level. We can recognize that there's a place, we see Fribourg, Canton of Fribourg, but some of the topics, so-so. We would probably like it to get Smart Living Lab, and instead it's identified Living Lab as a concept. So these are the kind of things you have to say, well, would this tool be performant enough for what I want to do? But the key point is that we take this large block of text, and from it, we extract several key things which we're going to accelerate the whole process of interpreting. If we were wanting to come back later and say, out of all of the news, which are news that are relevant when I'm talking about renewable energy, we would immediately get this as a hit. We would be able to interpret this information as useful for that purpose. Now, there is a concern when we apply these kind of algorithms. There's a term that I like here, which is algorithmically modified data, because maybe genetically modified food is in the typical conscious now. It's the sort of thing that people are used to thinking about, and you have a position whether that's a good or a bad thing, the mixing of science and nature. It's a similar way with data and also the consumer consciousness, that data doesn't just drop in as it is, it has a history, it has a context, including human processes that have brought it to be the way that it is, and this is especially true with the social media platforms. So it's not enough to say just the volume of information that we put out there, the number of followers on those accounts, but to understand the algorithms behind that are distributing this to the users, that just because something could be important based on the volume of discussion around it, it's going to come up based on the interactions, and this can lead even to negative things spreading faster, because people hook into those topics and tend to share them, to be alarmed. So this is important to treat in terms of our awareness of it. This is where we have to count on the humans to treat on these ethical topics about knowing where their data is coming from, similar to knowing where their food is coming from, and being aware as a consumer what's behind that. As a data scientist, I'm excited about the advances in deep learning At first, I was a little bit reluctant to jump on this because there was a period when it was really hype. You could just stick the word deep on any other phrase, and that would make it cutting edge. But what's exciting about deep learning, so here I'm talking about the type of machine learning where we have a neural network and we allow a hidden layer. It means we're going to put in some inputs, we're going to get out results, we're going to train it to do a process like what humans do, but we're not going to ask too many questions about what happens in the middle. We're not going to need to understand exactly how every decision was made. And what's exciting is this allows us to treat certain problems without having the same human approach of looking at every single feature that's behind. And it's accelerated the progress, most notably for computer vision, but increasingly in other areas as well. We can do this with sound. We can start to do it with molecules. So it's really been transformational that we start to have a type of machine learning that benefits from the scale of computing power that we have now and can advance beyond, in some cases, our human capacity. To show you for images what this would be like, this is a challenge that could be done by a human or a computer. Select all squares with speakers. Well, first, there's a question of semantics here. Are we talking about speakers as in presenters or speakers as the kind you listen to? I don't know. But it would be difficult for a human to judge from these which of those images are containing that, because the computers are approaching this problem in a different way with individual pixels. So in some specific cases, they can be outperforming the humans, but they can also be easily tricked. These are the kinds of points that we need to be careful of around this kind of technology. But it is reaching this level where we could give a problem to a computer that we wouldn't necessarily be able to treat ourselves. And so when we're confident in this technology, for certain types of problems, what this allows us to do is give it a huge volume of data and get a perspective which is less biased than a human, which is just based on the information that's in those images. In the case of present Switzerland, we have each year the report of the image of Switzerland in the foreign media that comes out. For 2017, you can see some of the themes. Roger Federer is always a hero. We have also kind of some themes around nature, like mountains, landslides. The negative ones are coming up in red. And what we added at the end of last year was to do this with Instagram. So the social media platform where the type of communication is mainly visual, mainly images. You have hashtags associated, you have some text, we can apply the text analytics. But what's interesting is also to just look at the images themselves without the way people are trying to promote it with the hashtag. So if we pull in all the images associated with Switzerland and then we pass that to Google Cloud Vision, so allowing these networks to process and find what's behind the images, we found some surprises. Especially, sky is not something that people normally tag the image with. You don't say, oh, here's the sky and it's gray, and today it's gray again. It's just not the kind of thing that people are going to go for on Instagram. But when we see that coming out of the computer vision as the most important topic, it tells us that people are shooting outdoors, that the image of Switzerland is very much connected with the outdoors. It fits with mountains and trees, which also came out as major themes. But it helps us to understand the strength in a way that isn't text-based, that's based purely on the images. And to align some of our campaigns, like currently we have Home of Drones, which is something that fits in with sky, also mountains. So it aids in that type of positioning. So Instagram was something we were proud of because that's something that's been emerging recently that appeals to a younger set, let's say. And the theme here is that it's about pioneering. It's about trying something new, but in concrete pieces where we know, okay, we're going to take just for a period of 1 year and we're going to take things that are associated with Switzerland, and that's going to be a chunk that's going to get us towards our overall vision of processing all the information. So next I'd like to go through some of these concrete examples of opportunities and how you can approach them in a small way, how you can get there stepwise and not just launch your spaceship and wait for news. Often we talk about artificial intelligence, and that sounds a little bit cold. We can also talk about augmented intelligence, which is when we have computers helping humans. I like adaptive intelligence, which I think it's Oracle who started talking about it this way, because it's not just that they're going to help us, but they should help us in ways that are friendly for the humans. I think we have a whole village here about this, about the user interface. But since we're developing them, we should develop them so that they work for us. And increasingly, we see this with voice interfaces, for example. But if we take the case of chatbots, even if you have a vision of an ultimate digital assistant where you just talk and it's going to respond, that's your Mars. Concretely, there are many small steps that you can take to get there. So the pioneering path is get one, play with it, right? Maybe at the beginning it only answers a few questions and it feels a little bit silly. But that's how you get on the path of playing with the technology and seeing what works for you, what doesn't work for you, where does it fit in, does it actually add value to your business? Another type is in terms of context. So it's not enough just to have the information, but it has to be connected with a meaning. If we have two different villages here, a manufacturing village and the nature village, and we're talking about a plant, they're going to be talking about it in very different ways. So we need to associate that term with the context, the industry that it's coming from, the village that it's coming from. It's also about interoperability. If these villages need to talk to each other, what are the ways that they're going to do that? And when we do this digitally, this is mainly through APIs, application programming interface. So when you're designing your processes around the digital transformation, you can think about how you're going to be able to connect up with other sources of information, how you're going to be able to both send your data out and bring other data in. And this is going to strengthen, this is like the network effect I talked about at the beginning. It's going to strengthen the value of your data to be able to transport it in that way. You need to have the interface, that point of interconnect. You also have to send it with the context, with the metadata, for example, that goes behind to allow people to understand what type of plant you might be talking about. Another way this is important in terms of context is it's not enough to just have a number. For example, we have a spike or we have a valley. Our numbers are way down. What does that mean? If you just look at that little piece of information, by itself, it could be alarming or not. You need to have a larger context, a benchmark, an industry benchmark, for example. And when you have those interconnects, you're able to pull that data in and build a context around it. If we talk about social media, it might seem that in a small local community, a term is suddenly, that's important to you, is suddenly growing in importance. But you have to look at around the global conversation. We've seen cases where this is because people just latch onto it because it speaks to a topic that's more meaningful for them. Another way is in terms of discovery. When you connect up and you have these networks of information, it allows to see which things are close together, to jump from one thing to another and find new sources of information, new sources of inspiration. So when you think about your problem, maybe someone in another industry is having a very similar problem. As you walk around through these villages, you have a chance to think about that. Bring your problem and ask it to someone who you didn't think would have an answer. Describe your dream project to them and see what it inspires for them, because this element of cross-pollination between is part of the power of digitalization. Crowdsourcing. So I like this example from We Robotics because it involves drones, so it fits well with our Home of Drones, Switzerland theme. But what's exciting about it is that they took a problem where they had too much information coming in from images from satellites and drones, and they open source it. They opened it up to the crowd to find the algorithms, to understand what's happening. So after a natural disaster, can we identify how many trees were lost, how many roads were lost, these visual objects on there. But by opening it up, they get better solutions in shorter time and treat a problem which would be too large for humans to treat efficiently and get these results. Now, in your case, maybe it's not something that you can go public with, right? So you have to think about who is the natural crowd, but it could be even within your company that you want to share this information and open up through your digital processes. So you can think of a sort of internal crowdsourcing if it's not something that you're ready to open up as an AI challenge. Patterns and exceptions. In technical terms, we often speak about anomaly detection. So looking for something that doesn't fit, that doesn't look right. What's important here is if we look as humans at this image, probably you're looking at the red one, right? It really stands out, it catches your eye. But maybe that's not the most relevant piece of information in the data set that you're looking at. Maybe it's the largest one that matters. Maybe it's the small one. Maybe it's some that are all going in the same direction when we expect them to be going the other way. So part of anomaly detection is that we often try to use a set of algorithms which we call unsupervised, where instead of giving it the human process, we put this in, we get that out, we just say, here's this data. we think there's patterns in there. What are the patterns? And we do it kind of in the reverse order. First, let the computer cluster it or find what are the patterns. Then pass it to a human to say, okay, these might be relevant examples or not. This can help, for example, for fraud detection. If you take the case of human resources, it can be something for finding patterns in expense reports, in accounting. We have a lot of these kind of examples around anomaly detection. But it's applicable in a general sense. It's anywhere where you have patterns in the data, and then you have exceptions that aren't going in the same way. And trust and traceability. A lot of the talk right now is around blockchain, and blockchain is really in its infancy. We do start to see some nice concrete applications. The one that I picked here at the bottom is about food supply chain, and specifically in the US for turkeys. Around this time of year, people want to know where their turkey is coming from. Around here, it could be something else, cheese, ham, your food of choice. But you can put that on the blockchain to have the whole process. What's exciting about this technology, underlying it, is the themes of trust and traceability. It's not just the current evolution, which is not necessarily very efficient. It's like I said with the chatbots. You want to get something, play with it, test it, and start to see how it's going to fit together. But that underneath, we're starting to connect and to move beyond the current version of the internet, which it's amazing that it's lasted as it is for so long. And think about how can that better fit to our human needs? How can it better fit to the kind of challenges that we have, such as being able to trust where the data came from, being able to trust who has access to our data, and where the things around us have been coming from, how they've been interacting, and whether they have what we need. So that brings me back to Mars and this journey that I'm happy to take together. And I hope that as you go around to the different villages, you'll bring with you your Mars, your challenge that you're trying to tackle. And you'll pose these questions, especially about what's the smallest piece of that you can deliver, not in generations, but in 2 weeks, in 1 year, with just a small part of your team, a small part of your resources, because this part of the future of digitalization is happening right now. And I think that all of us here can be a part of that. So thanks for taking this together.